The unsurpassed, penetrating and perfect truth is seldom met with, even in 100,000 myriad kalpas. Now we can see and hear it. We can remember and accept it. I vow to make the Buddha's truth one with myself. Homage to the Buddha, homage to the Dharma, homage to the Sangha. Today I'm going to talk about acceptance of suffering. Well, we talk a lot about suffering. The Buddha talked a lot about suffering and the need to accept it. And usually we talk in terms of our own suffering. We suffer, and if we don't accept it, we suffer more. I'll come back to us. But there's other forms of suffering that we need to learn to accept. Suffering in the world, an enormous amount of suffering in our present world, as we know. War, or the horrible suffering that goes along with that. The COVID pandemic is still going on. Hundreds of people still dying every day, although we think, oh, it's all gone away. It hasn't. It's just a lot less, which is good, but it's still there. You know, each of those persons who dies probably has somebody who loves them, and it's really sad that they go. Racial hatred and violence still going on. Doesn't seem to be diminishing a whole lot. Climate change and pollution, we know all about that. Immense suffering to animals and people all over the world. You know. So we can get really upset and angry and outraged. We might feel we have a moral duty to be angry. Because if I'm not angry, then I'm somehow condoning it and saying it's okay. That we should sort of refuse to accept the suffering in our world. But actually, we have to accept these things. We have to accept the fact of war, racial violence, climate change, and all that. They're there. You know, we can't say they're not happening. We need to accept them. These are here with us now. And that doesn't mean I think it's a good thing. Acceptance doesn't mean we have to like something. We just need to stop resisting it or pretending it's not there. Resistance is the antithesis of acceptance. Climate change is a classic example, of course. You know, we know there's climate change, an inconvenient truth, and if we want to do anything about it, we have to accept it as a fact of our lives. We keep pretending it's not there, we're not going to do anything. And looking at straight on at something, climate change or whatever, then we can do something about it, even in our small way. You know, racial hatred, to be aware that it's happening and not just oblivious. And to actually accept something, it makes us a bit less angry. Maybe we can start to look at some of the reasons why things happen. You know, why is there this racial hatred? Why is there climate change? Well, why all these things? What are the causes of war? To see some of those things in ourselves, as Reverend Master Jiyu said, we have the seeds of all that within ourselves. And here we are with this world full of violence and hatred and all that, suffering. But if we can accept it, that these things are there, somehow we're not quite so angry. These things are happening, what can we do? And acceptance is a real blessing. It just helps with that suffering, helps us to find peace amidst it all. We just had our transfer of merit ceremony, which is a huge blessing actually, because it's a way of accepting that there's suffering in our world. We know that it's there, we know that it's here, and we offer merit for beings who are suffering. People we know, people we don't know, animals, human, the dead and the living, as we say. All these beings we may think of during our ceremony, or we may not know at all. Groups of people, you know, people undergoing war or, you know, famine. And to offer merit helps us to accept that these things are there. And conversely, accepting them helps us to offer merit and compassion for beings, because acceptance and compassion go together. Well, then there's suffering that's closer to home. When there's someone close to us, who's ill or suffering in some way, having a lot of pain, sickness, or whatever it might be, it can be really hard for us to accept it. Maybe harder for us than for them sometimes. You can get really overwhelmed by somebody suffering who's close to you, you know. But we need to take care we don't just get completely overwhelmed. We need to accept that suffering. If we're overcome by feelings of sadness, guilt, helplessness and all that, because we can't take away their suffering, you know, we can't take it away. Or we might feel we somehow caused it, whether we did or not. Maybe we have, but still, we have to accept things as they are. It doesn't help to just, you know, sit there and say, oh, this is all too much, I can't bear it. We have to be able to actually say, okay, this is happening, how can I help? To sit still in the midst of it all. And remember that we don't know everything, we don't see everything. We don't see all the causes of all these things. We might be more worried, as I said, than the person who is concerned. We may be suffering more and feel it more than they do. There was Reverend Master Jiyu, when I was her assistant, it would be before a ceremony, and she'd feel really tired. She'd be, okay, I need to do this ceremony. I don't know if I can do it. Can I? You know, her legs are not working too well. And then she'd get here and do the ceremony. I'd be all through the ceremony, I'd be all worried about her, looking around, is she okay? She's going to fall, you know. She'd be fine. She'd be fine. Our ceremony would be over. She'd say, oh, that was lovely. I just felt the presence of the Buddhas and ancestors. And I'd been all worried and distressed, you know, quite unnecessarily. Sometimes, you know, people are doing better than we think and accepting things better than we might think. We don't have to be more worried than they are. Thinking of parents who have a child suffering from illness, that must be really hard, you know. Again, when I was a child, my mother would, my brother and I would get little fevers. We were in Africa, we get these spiky fevers. My mother would be worried sick. My dad, who was a doctor, would say, oh, fine, they'll be fine in the morning. And of course we'd be fine in the morning, but she'd be more suffering than we were, you know, certainly more than he was, because he knew that these little things come and go, but she'd be all worried, understandably, because parents worry terribly about their children. And to be able to sit still and accept what's happening and just have faith, just trust that actually, fundamentally, everything is all okay. Even if, you know, a child might die, they do die. To be a parent with have a child that is dying must be one of the worst sufferings possible, but still, at a certain point, that parent has to be able to accept, I think my child's going to die, or might die. How can I best help? Rather than just be completely overwhelmed with grief. What can I do to help? But then you have to accept it. If somebody has a problem with alcohol or addiction, you know, if we can accept it, then we can help them to accept it. And maybe help them to deal with it. If we don't want to look, this isn't happening. No, they're fine. No, you know, he likes to drink now and then, but he's okay. He can handle it. And maybe not, you know, but to be able to accept it, to accept the person as they are, to accept what they're doing, and to be able to do something to help, rather than just pretend it's not happening. Trying to protect somebody from the consequences of their actions, you know, saying, well, I'll just bail them out, you know, bail them out of whatever it is, may not be helpful. They might need to actually face those consequences and learn something, you know. There's a story of, I was thinking of too much sympathy or too much empathy, what Joan Halifax calls, I think calls it toxic empathy. And she tells a story about being in Nepal at their Apaya Zen Center. They have medical clinics in Nepal every year. They go to Nepal and offer medical clinics to people who would never be able to get to a doctor. And one time she was there, and this father brought this little girl in who'd been horribly burned. And her wounds are all really dirty, you know, and she needed to have them debrided, as they call it, just to wash all the scabs off. Frightfully painful. This poor little girl was screaming her head off. And Joan was totally overcome by this and almost passed out, by the feeling. And you just thought, wait a minute, this is not helpful. I'm flat out on the floor. It's not going to help anybody. So she kind of pulled herself together, kind of came back to herself, grounded herself, and offered merit, offered compassion for this little girl. And it completely changed it for her. She was able to just be there with it. And eventually the little girl, the thing was over. Little girl was carried home by her dad, waving and smiling, because they'd bound her up and helped her. Because suffering does pass, But to take it on in that way, just to completely get overwhelmed by someone's suffering, isn't helpful for them and is not helpful for us. So that's what she calls toxic empathy. But compassion, not taking that on so much, but offering compassion, like we do in our transfer of merit, offering compassion, offering merit. It's different, and it can actually help both them and us. So I thought it was a very helpful story. Furthermore, there may be reasons for somebody's suffering beyond what we can see, Karma from the past. There's a story in the Denkuroku, which many of us are familiar with, the stories of our ancestors in our lineage. And there's a story about Shayata, who asks Kumarata, who will become his master. Shayata asks him, why do my parents have so much suffering? They've always been good Buddhists, they're good people, they've tried to live a goodly life, and they've always had all this illness, and their ventures all go awry. The things just don't turn out well for them. They've had a really difficult life. But our neighbor, who behaves like Chandana the outlaw, just a terrible person who is selfish and harmful, he seems to be thriving. All his ventures prosper, he's healthy, he's living a good long life. Why is this so? And Kumarata explains that there's karmic reasons for this they don't see. It may well be that his parents are reaping the consequences of some previous harm that they might have done. And their neighbor is just, enjoying good merit from something good that he did. However, this karma will wear itself out eventually, because karma doesn't last forever either. Karma wears itself out. So this neighbor will use up all his good karma and end up in not such a good place. And their parents are actually cleansing karma by undergoing what they're undergoing. And if they can do it without complaint and just accept it and do their best and not think they're doing something wrong. Because Shasta says, what are they doing wrong? Well, nobody's doing something wrong. They're just taking the consequences of things from the past and just to accept them and do the best one can and not lose faith or not think, well, this being good isn't working, I think I'll be like the outlaw, But no, to actually have faith that something is working out for the best, even if we don't see it, we don't know it. That's really helpful. Here comes to our own suffering. If we're undergoing a lot of pain or illness, or some mental, deep despair or fear or worry or something that seems really overwhelming, well, if we can sit still in the midst of it and truly accept it and not think we're doing something wrong, then we can reflect. This is the cleansing of karma. It's not just useless suffering. I'm cleansing karma with this. It's really helpful. It's not just a kind of panacea. It really does help, because at the very least, our suffering is teaching us patience and acceptance, if we're not kicking against it, but to actually accept it. This is happening to me. Of course, if we can do something to help it, then we do. We take the medicine, we do a PT, or whatever it might be. We do what we can, but fundamentally, we just need to accept as deeply as we can the things that come our way, whether they're physical things, mental things, or whatever it might be. We don't need to know that past cause. We may know, we may not, but we don't need to worry. We just do our best with it and trust that things are working themselves out as they should. We don't need to know. But with faith, we can accept it. Yeah. If we're growing old, we don't have the strength we used to have. It's normal. It's normal not to have the strength we used to have when we were 35. And we need to accept it and not fight against it and strive to do everything we used to do. You know, the AARP syndrome, I used to call it, and everybody's old people doing daft things like young people do, and thinking this is great, river rafting and climbing mountains and doing all this stuff. I'm sure it's great, but you don't need that. You don't need to do all that stuff to show that you're not aging, because we are. We're all aging. I'm older than I was when I came in. It's normal to get old. It's normal to get sick. And to use the opportunity to sit still and practice acceptance and patience is a huge blessing, and not be striving and trying to force ourselves to do something really we can't really do, to prove to ourselves that we're not getting old, because we are. Like Reverend Master Koten saying, you know, I'm getting old. How wonderful. How wonderful. Some of our suffering may be more from a more external cause. It might be the result of something we think is unfair. We feel that we've been cheated out of something, or things, just circumstances have gone against us. We've got somebody else's comeuppance, you know. Whether somebody has wronged us, or we're just undergoing difficulties we don't think we've caused. Here they are, like being in a war zone, you know. We haven't caused that war, but here we are with this really difficult situation. We've tried to do our best, and now things are really hard, like Shayata's neighbor, you know. Why is this happening to me? And if you can remember, there are karmic causes for things. It can help. Great Master Bodhidharma has advice for us in this book, The Zen Teaching of Bodhidharma, which is really nice. Very simple, straightforward. He doesn't waste a lot of words. And his first thing is outline of practice. And he says, well, the first of it, there's 4 ways of entering the Dharma, as he calls it. 4. The very first one is suffering injustice. It's the first of these 4 essential practices. Suffering injustice also means accepting suffering, accepting the things that seem unfair, undeserved in our lives. And here's what he says. When those who search for the path encounter adversity, they should think to themselves, in countless ages gone by, I've turned from the essential to the trivial and wandered through all manner of existence, often angry without cause and guilty of numberless transgressions. Now, though I do no wrong, I'm punished by my past. Neither gods nor men can foresee when an evil deed will bear its fruit. I accept it with an open heart and without complaint of injustice. The sutras say, when you meet with adversity, don't be upset because it makes sense. With such understanding, you're in harmony with reason, and by suffering injustice, you enter the path. Really helpful to accept it with an open heart and without complaint of injustice. We long to be thus. Because by doing that, the suffering, you know, is taken out of it. We're not kicking against it and saying, this is not fair, I shouldn't be having this happen. You know, I want something else, you know. And there are so many ways in which we may suffer, both in external circumstances, somebody's injustice, or on our own internal ones, all our states of mind. Many of them may bring on ourselves. Anger, jealousy, fear, anxiety, despair, inadequacy. You know, many of them sometimes we feel as though we can't do anything about them. We may not be able to remove them because of things from the past, but we can sit still with them. Well, there's an endless list of states of mind that can create suffering for us. But if we can sit still in the midst of them and not judge them, I shouldn't be like this, I shouldn't be angry still, I shouldn't be having all this despair come up, I shouldn't be worried about everything. Well, we have it. Can we just sit still in the midst of it and accept, this is what I have, this is what I need to deal with, this is what it is for me, this is how it is for me now. May not be the case tomorrow, because everything changes. Suffering does change, it doesn't last forever. but to truly look, see how we may have created some of our own suffering, probably a lot of it. See how we feed our states of mind. And then we can work to accept them with compassion. Compassion, essential compassion, not sort of saying, well, I shouldn't be like this. Compassion. I have this. If it wasn't this, it would be something else. But this has brought me to the Dharma. This suffering can help me. Helps me to learn patience, helps me to learn kindness to other beings who have suffering. If everything was just fine, we wouldn't need to be, we wouldn't think we need to have patience and compassion and all that. We'd just be living our life sort of blindly. But no, we have suffering, whether external suffering or our own internal little demons that work on us. And to accept those things with compassion and not with judgment. We say this all the time, saying it again. It's immensely helpful. Compassion, essential with acceptance. They go together. You can't have acceptance without having compassion there. You can't just say, well, I accept it, but I think it's the pits. It's essential to have compassion and acceptance together. That kindness. Everybody is imperfect. Everybody has suffering. All beings. To have a body is to suffer, they say. You've got a body, you're going to suffer. And whether we're dealing with our own suffering or other people's suffering, compassion is vital. Trying to accept the massive suffering that's going on in our world, we have to have compassion. Otherwise, we're completely overwhelmed by it. And we can't just offer merit and kindness and some kind of understanding, of why people do what they do, even if we don't understand. There's things that I don't understand. That itself is a kind of acceptance. I don't know everything. I don't understand everything. I don't know why people do the things they do. I don't know why somebody wanted to suddenly make war on somebody. There's reasons, but I don't know them. I don't have to know them, but I can accept that this is happening, and maybe these people are doing the best they can. But if we're angry about what's happening, angry about the state of the world, or angry about what's happening to somebody we love, or angry about ourselves, and we refuse to accept what's going on, we can't have compassion. We're just angry, and that doesn't help. But if we can accept conditions as they are, there's room for compassion, to relinquish the judgment, the space for kindness and compassion, both for those who are suffering and for those who perpetrate suffering, including us. We perpetrate suffering, we've created suffering, we've made mistakes. Can we accept the suffering that we've created in the past, the things that we've caused? We haven't been perfect the whole life, To accept those things, we have to see them. And then we can say, okay, I'm sorry, and let it go, and not cling on to our mistakes, because that doesn't help. To forgive ourselves. The self, Reverend Master Jiyu used to say, where there is self, there is suffering, not the other way around. Where there is self, there is suffering. It's not the case that where there's suffering, there's self, because many people have suffering they can't possibly, avoid. People in war zones and places of famine and the like, you can't blame them and say, well, just because you're selfish that you're starving. It's the other way. Where there's self, there is suffering. And when we look and we see that we're suffering about something, very often there's a self there. Not always, but very often there is, and we can look and see. When we cling to our self, our thought of a self, and we all do that, we think ourselves as a real entity that has to be protected and given what it wants and made comfortable and, the center of the universe, avoid what it doesn't like. This is a suffering, because it's never going to be that way. There's always going to be something that's not perfect. But if we can begin to let go of this seeming self, and with all it wants and all it doesn't want and all its likes and dislikes and me, we can begin to let go of our suffering about it, because most of our suffering is concerned with me, a lot of it. And if you can relinquish that large me a little bit, and have compassion for that me, because you all have it, but to let go a little bit, of clinging to this self that wants this and doesn't want that. We cling to a lot less to our suffering. It really helps. It doesn't just go away, the self's always with us, but it's what we do with it, it's up to us. There's something a whole lot bigger than we are, much bigger than this little self. And if we can come back to that, and remember that we're not separate from that in any way at all, there's always that which is greater than we are, of which we're just a little part. And this little self is actually a completely soluble thing. We just don't know that. We think it's a little eggshell, but it's not really. But if we can relinquish that a bit, we can just dissolve that seeming shell. And remember, we're just a part of everything else. We don't have to have everything we want, but we can learn to accept what comes our way, to accept the conditions of our lives, internal, external, accept the conditions of the world, do what we can to help, but accepting that we can't do everything, accepting the suffering of somebody we love, and trusting that there's something deeper and bigger going on than what we can see. Suffering is not wasted, it's not useless. There's compassion within it. And to have faith in that great matter that is compassion, and turn towards it, especially when we're suffering, especially when things are difficult, to turn towards that. There's something bigger than me here. There are reasons this is going on. Am I contributing to them? Or are they just something I just need to bear? Maybe both, To see that our little self is not that important, is not the reality. We can be more concerned with helping other beings than just with making ourselves, okay. And this helps us let go of all our fear and worry and despair and anxiety and all that, and entrust ourselves to that, the great matter for which we train. To practice acceptance in order to remember that we are part of that great matter. We need to practice acceptance of all those conditions of our lives because they are part of it. They're not separate. Here are the horrible conditions, and there's that nice thing over there. No, we're all part of the nice thing over here. And the conditions, whether we like them or not, are just part of that. To remember that, to practice acceptance as deeply as we can. All those many conditions. Nothing is in any way separate from that. And this helps us to let go of our suffering and maybe find joy. That's it. Nice to see you all. Thank you.